So in terms of presentation we're going to go through, can everyone see the slides now changed across to a different deck? So you should be able to see a sort of Tennis Wales slide with the clay courts. But, you know, effectively, the coronavirus clearly has had a significant impact on tennis, both domestically, you know, here in Wales, across the UK, and also internationally. You know, we're seeing all sports, every walk of life, every business being disrupted. And we expect that to continue into the foreseeable future. All the advice and the guidance we've had so far is that this won't be a coming out of lockdown and things going back to before. It will be very much a phased transition back to a new normal. So we appreciate there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. Some of the questions we can answer, some we can't. We do a lot of the same things I imagine you guys are doing in terms of watching the news, reading things online, trying to find out as much as we can locally. And then, of course, using our network, if you like, through ministers and through partners and through the LTA to try and find out as much as we can for the sport. Now, as things stand, you know, domestically here in Wales, tennis courts are currently closed. And again, a massive thank you to venues, coaches for being really cooperative. It was really important in terms of the public health advice that we received, that, you know, to really stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus, you know, all tennis courts had to be closed at pretty short notice. And we've been really pleased by how supportive the sort of tennis community has been in supporting us with that. In terms of our own activities, both, you know, leagues, tournaments, competitions, events, funded programs that we run here at Tennis Wales and within the LTA, all of those are currently cancelled until the 28th of June. So that's a bit of a line in the sand for us in terms of any organised activity. We're not planning any leagues, tournaments or activities before that date, but I'll come on to a bit more detail in a moment around, you know, what that means for venues and social play and things up until then. What's really clear across the board, and again, this isn't just our industry, but revenue and participation have been affected. You know, we've seen the massive loss of membership income. This is normally a great time of year for clubs renewing their membership. The clocks are changed and people coming into play. We're seeing a huge drop, obviously, in revenue. You know, it's non-existent at the moment. From a coaching perspective, you know, we have, you know, between 170 and 200 tennis coaches working in our sport, again, who are reliant on the income from group coaching, individual lessons, which has now disappeared. Sponsors, you know, sponsors are not immune to this situation either. Tennis Wales alone has seen about a loss of about £250,000 in the first sort of 4 or 5 weeks of the pandemic. And obviously with the cancellation of Wimbledon, a huge amount of commercial revenue from sponsors. And again, our partners are also affected. So whether that's Sport Wales, Welsh Government, the LTA, everybody's in exactly the same situation. So I think before I pass over in terms of moving on to the agenda, you know, we're really clear this is an extremely unsettling period for everyone, whether that's club volunteers, whether it's people running indoor tennis facilities, whether it's coaches who are wondering about their livelihood, or, you know, referees and officials who are used to running tournaments at this time of year. It's clearly very unsettling, both professionally from a sporting perspective, but also personally, because we've all got family and people affected in this way, whether it's, you know, a loss of livelihood or people on furlough or, you know, people being affected by the virus itself. You know, it's struck everybody very close to home. In terms of a Tennis Wales perspective, all colleagues are currently working, so we haven't furloughed anyone in our organisation. Part of the reason for that is that we received public funding already, so we received money from the Welsh Government and through Sport Wales. So again, you can't use furlough money on top of public funding you've already received. And secondly, because actually we think there's a huge amount of work for us to do now to keep talking to venues, to keep working with coaches, to be liaising with partners, sponsors and Sport Wales to make sure that tennis is certainly at the front of the queue for opening back up once we know exactly what that looks like. So all of the Tennis Wales team, whoever you're used to working with, is still very much out and about, talking to colleagues, working with people, albeit from home. Our offices in Cardiff and Wrexham are currently closed, but email addresses and mobile phone numbers will still put you in touch, and we'll be sharing everyone's contact details to make sure everyone on the call has got a contact point into our team. We're also in regular contact with the LTA, so obviously the Lawn Tennis Association are the national governing body for tennis across Great Britain. They're working very closely with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the Sports Minister, and obviously Boris Johnson's government. And we're doing a parallel process through the sort of support and the partners we've got with the Welsh Sports Association and Sport Wales to make sure that we're having conversations with Welsh Government to understand the public health situation and what that means in terms of funding, investment, and decision-making on when things can return to some sort of normality. So far, our focus has been to ensure tennis abides by all the public health advice, making sure that, tennis players, people playing our sport or working in the sport aren't at risk, communicating any key messages, whilst also supporting that network we have of 86 venues, 200 coaches, and our partners and officials. So a lot of our work so far has been conveying key messages that are coming from Welsh Government, and that we can make sure that we've got the key information coming out to everybody in a timely way. So hopefully you've all been receiving that, and it's been helpful to see. I'm just going to refresh my screen because I'm led to believe that you guys have a great big line across it, and you also have a red flashing box, so I apologize for that. I will close that one down, and we'll go again with a better version of that presentation. So bear with me one moment. We'll reopen where we were. Just want to make sure you guys can see everything properly. The wizardry of technology. I think this is the most I've ever used Zoom in the last 6 months, let alone at any other time in my career. It's incredible what the software can do, but a few gremlins that we will try and remove. So I'll reshare the screen with you now. Hopefully it's a better looking document than it was 2 moments ago.
Yeah, that looks fine, Simon.
Better, apologies for that one. Great, so again, our focus so far has been on communication, really looking at those key messages and passing on information as it became available to us. What we have been trying to do alongside that is to access any pots of funding, make sure we're sharing any information about loans, grants, and also start a scenario plan, which from looking at the questions that have been submitted, a lot of the questions seem to be more around, well, what do we do next? And that's a big piece of work that we've been talking about with colleagues in Sport Wales, with the Welsh Sports Association, with the LTA and other national governing bodies about how sport needs to adapt for a new normal. So in terms of what we're going to cover off, because I'm going to hand over, delighted to say that we've got Matt Williams joining us, who works for the Welsh Sports Association. And Matt looks after policy and communication, so he very much has a regular dialogue with ministers, both from a Welsh perspective, but also keeping track of what's happening at the UK government level. And from a Tennis Wales perspective, we've got a number of our team here. So Jamie Kluwer, who's just joined us this week as head of participation. He's not doing a great job, to be honest, because no one's participating, but he joins us this week, and he's going to be a really valuable resource in terms of getting things back up and running. Pam and Luke will be presenting on some of the LTA and Sport Wales funding. And we've also got Ellie Lewis, our coaching and volunteering manager, on the call, and myself obviously helping narrate the session as well. So I'm going to move on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over in terms of the running order. We're going to update first on the Welsh Sports Association. What are we hearing from Welsh Government and UK Government with key messages? We're going to spend about 15 minutes with Matt. Then we're going to talk about the LTA support package that hopefully coaches and venues have already seen. But again, we're going to be sort of just narrating what that looks like in terms of funding and access to support. The same from Sport Wales. And then back to me at the end in terms of what the new normal could look like. So Matt, I'm going to pass over to you, if that's okay.
That's great.
Let you chat through in terms of what we're hearing from the government and then what funding's available from the public sector.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Simon. So, like Simon said, I'm the Policy and Comms Manager for the Wales Sports Association. We work very closely with all of the national governing bodies for sports in Wales, the leisure trusts, local authorities, and our role really is to undertake political and lobbying activity on behalf of sports in Wales in a way that Sport Wales isn't able to do because they're funded by the Welsh Government directly. So I've been involved for the last couple of weeks in some fairly high level discussions around what the pressures on sport are at the moment, and also beginning to think about what return to activity looks like in the coming 6 months probably, or if not more. We've had some pretty significant wins in the last few days. So yesterday, the Welsh Government announced a new package of support for community amateur sports clubs and sporting charities in Wales. That will inject quite a lot of new cash into the sporting economy in the short term, and it'll fill a few gaps in the cover that was already available. It won't fill all of the holes, but what we're hopeful it will do is free up some Sport Wales funding to cover other gaps. So I know some tennis clubs have been experiencing problems getting business rate support from their local authorities. Hopefully this new package will fill some of those gaps. I'd really recommend you speak to your local authority if you've been refused grant. And if you continue to be refused, there are other opportunities available to you now. And I guess the thing that I can perhaps set the scene for is what the messages coming out of government at the moment are around what the return to activity might look like. Now, this is a pretty rapidly moving picture. I spoke to Simon about this, I think last Thursday, and the picture has moved on quite a lot in the week that in this week. We've got pretty conflicting messages coming out of Westminster and Welsh Government at the moment. Most of you will probably have seen the headlines in the press today around what the UK government might be planning. And there are some real tensions in the way that Welsh Government and UK Government seem to want to approach this, which make it quite difficult for us to anticipate what is going to happen next. Welsh Government faces a real policy dilemma in this, in that significant numbers of people in Wales live very close to the English border. Significant numbers of people in Wales live on one side of the border and work on the other side of the border. And the vast majority of people in Wales get their news from UK sources. So it's relatively difficult for Welsh Government to take a different course of action to the UK Government. And that all needs to be worked out. I'm told that they're trying to iron that out this afternoon. There's currently a meeting going on. There will be a meeting of the Welsh Government Cabinet this evening, and announcements potentially early next week or on Sunday around what the earliest phases of this will look like. And what we do know, or we think we know with some certainty, is that the situation we're in now will continue for at least a couple of weeks, with maybe some tweaking around the edges. And then towards the end of the month and early in June, we may see the next phase of this situation develop. Earlier this week, in calls with Welsh Government, they were talking about this being a 5-phase process to return to normality. So at the moment, we're in what I'd call the black phase, nearly total lockdown, nearly total shutdown. The next phase will be red, then amber, green, and then the final phase is return to normality. So the key in this is that green isn't normal everyday activity. It's still some measure of social distancing in place, still some measures to support the economy in place. And the big challenge for Welsh Government at the moment is that we think, whilst Wales overall is past its peak of infection, that might have happened last week. That's largely driven by the large population centres in the south. North Wales looks to be peaking around this week, maybe next week. Mid and West Wales will peak a little later again. So Wales is not necessarily universally over the worst of this, though we do think the infection rate has dropped significantly. And the challenge in returning to activity is to keep that infection rate down, to make sure that when we return to activity, we're not spreading the virus back into the community and, inadvertently causing another peak in a couple of months' time. So with all of that in mind, what is being discussed at the moment, certainly at a Welsh level, was that in the next phase of return to activity, we'd be seeing more than anything a return to participation. So for tennis in particular, what that probably means is the reopening of outdoor facilities for people to participate, probably with members of their own family in the first instance. And that is probably the extent of what might happen. And that would be true across all sports. So, cricket clubs might be able to reopen net facilities for skills training, but, certainly no return to normal competitive play or anything like that. One of the things that seems to be fairly clear as a worry for Welsh Government at the moment is the idea of coached and taught sessions are a particular worry for them, and they seem to be thinking that these need to return later, and that's because the public health thinking at the moment is seeing coaches essentially as potential links between groups of people who might not otherwise meet. So if a coach does a session in the morning with someone who has got asymptomatic COVID and then meets with another person in the afternoon, they may pass the infection along and infect another household, and that becomes problematic in terms of the infection rate. So Welsh Government are quite keen, I think, to see ways in which that can be mitigated and ways in which we can try and control that, whether that means making sure people meet less people, whether we're making sure that coaches only meet certain groups of people, that kind of thing. But the overwhelming concern for Welsh Government at the moment is how to control that rate of infection on the kind of public health front, and that's guiding a lot of their thinking. So sitting alongside all of that, the other conversations I've been involved with Welsh Government are that return to activity, that phasing of return to normality, which will probably continue until at least the end of this year, presents really significant challenges to sporting businesses and people who are employed in sport, whether that's coaches, whether that's the national governing bodies, or whether that's facilities, and what kind of support we need to put in place to ensure that we can, when we get out the other side of this, that sports haven't fallen over, that we haven't lost volunteers, that we haven't lost access to facilities, that coaches haven't left the sector entirely to go and work in other industries or anything like that. And we're beginning to think through what that might mean in different scenarios of lockdown. And this is really early days at the moment. You know, these conversations started happening probably 2 weeks ago. We're still uncertain about what the future scenarios will be, and we're having, you know, ongoing back and forth discussions with Welsh Government about what that looks like and what we understand that to mean. So some of the key pressures we've got at the moment will be that furlough runs out at the moment on the 30th of June, and there's some key deadlines around that that are particularly worrying for some organisations. So to access furlough money, you'll have had to have put people on furlough by the beginning of June because the minimum period is 3 weeks. And there are some tax and HMRC issues around that. So what we're expecting is that UK government will make some announcements around the future of furlough in the coming days or week. At the moment, we're expecting that there will be a phased exit from furlough, but we don't really know what that looks like. It might be on a sector basis. So some sectors like sport might see a slower phased exit from furlough, whilst others will return more quickly. But we're certainly expecting that, you know, that is going to come to an end over a period of months at the moment. Things may change. The picture around the self-employment support alongside that is a little less clear at the moment, but I know Welsh Government are pushing for the UK government to phase that support out alongside any phasing of furlough. So news on that will follow hopefully in the coming week. And then more broadly, there are significant pressures on facilities as we return to activity. You know, speaking to the leisure trusts who run the leisure centres and some of the indoor tennis facilities or host the indoor tennis facilities, they face really big challenges if indoor activity can't return or if they're not allowed to admit as many people into facilities as they were previously able to. So we think Welsh Government are going to have to put some support in place to help them get through this period. So I think that's a fairly quick rundown of where we are at the moment at a fairly high level. I'm happy to take questions from people.
No, thanks, Matt. It's really helpful. And I think the narrative very much about working with Matt to make sure we're fully aligned in terms of UK government news, information, the LTA alignment from a UK perspective. Also, we're trying to look at all the sort of criteria and the lobbying. I think in terms of tennis's position, we're in a positive position in that we do have a sport with 1,200 tennis courts, mainly outdoors, right the way across Wales. It is a sport you can play recreationally in small groups with people you live with. So as a starting point, we're not reliant on lots of big leisure facilities having to reopen, but we do have some real risks. There are some significant risks that some of our larger clubs and the larger indoor centres that need a huge amount of people coming through to pay membership and to take part in coaching may not be an absolute priority for Welsh Government. And we also have the risk, obviously, around employability of coaches and people working in the sports, that again, the longer these challenges are in place, the worse it is. So there's certainly lots of soft lobbying going on with Matt's help, with the Welsh Sports Association, but ultimately this is going to come back to a public health decision, which is first and foremost the most important piece. But again, we have to protect people's lives, and we have to obviously protect the capacity of the NHS if there were to be a second or spike in cases being recorded. So I think what we'll do, Matt, we'll move on, but if you're happy, we will share the WSA's details around accessing any grants in terms of how furlough works, how the business rate relief grants, because I know a couple of tennis clubs are going to benefit as a result of your lobbying now, where they can receive rate relief and local authority grants. If we share the WSA details, it would be great, then clubs can come to you individually as and when.
Yeah, no problem.
Superb, thank you. We're going to move on, and we're going to talk a bit for sort of 10 minutes with Luke around the LTA support packages that hopefully most of you have seen. But again, just to give you an overview of the support being provided from Roehampton.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm just going to quickly go through the LTA support packages. So on your screen, basically, is a screenshot of what the LTA's COVID-19 support packages webpage would look like. Hopefully, a lot of you have already seen this. But the first one available to venues is the LTA loan repayment scheme. This affects 14 venues in Wales that have a current loan in place. And what the LTA are doing is giving a repayment holiday for up to 6 months to club venues with these loans, taken from the 1st of April 2020 to the 30th of September. So those direct debits basically will be paused for that 6-month period. The next one, which went live this week, is the LTA venue registration reimbursement scheme. So this is basically where venues can be reimbursed for the fees that they paid for the current year. The system's gone live on Monday, and you basically just need to fill in the online form via the website and put in your details. We've had an update this afternoon. Already 38 venues have completed the process, which is great. The total value of the reimbursement is basically equivalent to £40,000 to tennis in Wales. So that's great. If you're a venue and you haven't yet done it, go online as soon as you can. And I know the LTA are turning around payments as quickly as possible as well. The next one is the venue support line. This is a helpline for registered venues to call to get free advice to find out if they're eligible potentially or not for government support, or to access support from the legal and tax helpline through Brabner's. Again, on the website, you've got the telephone number, and all you need to quote is your LTA registration number when you give them a call. The final one, which hasn't gone live yet, we're waiting for the process to be activated and further details, is the hardship fund. We'll contact you obviously as soon as that becomes available, but we're basically anticipating that's going to be a scheme that is interest-free loan funding. Moving on to coaches and tutors, this went live several weeks ago with the accredited coach and tutor grant scheme. That will support more than 80 full-time coaches that are eligible for that in Wales, which is the equivalent of just over £1,000 per coach. And in total, it's just under £100,000 for coaches across Wales that have been set aside. We are obviously aware that we have a lot of part-time coaches who aren't eligible for this funding, and we're currently talking with the LTA about what additional support could be made available for this. Accredited coach hardship fund, so it's similar to the venue hardship fund. We're just waiting for the details of what this is going to look like and when it's going to go live. But again, we expect this to be in the form of interest-free loans. There's the coach support line as well, which is available to LTA accredited coaches to get free advice, again, around government support packages and applications, as well as any other questions that you may have. And the final one is the accreditation extension and online CPD courses. So the LTA have agreed a period of leniency for renewing accreditation, which will see a temporary extension to the normal accreditation renewal grace period. And in addition to that, the LTA have made available all their CPD courses available free of charge until the 31st of July, which is a great opportunity for upskilling during this current downtime.
Great, thanks, Luke. And I think from the LTA's perspective, this is they've turned this around very quickly. Across GB, it's a £20 million support package just to try and stabilise the sport in this short term before we start looking at the long-term implications. And I'm sure the LTA will go further once they know exactly how long lockdown is going to last and what more needs to be done. But effectively, there are venues in Wales who've got LTA facility loans that won't have to repay them for 6 months. All venues should be applying to the LTA to get their venue registration fees back. So that's the money you normally pay to us for your leagues, your tournaments, your competitions, your Wimbledon ballots, your public liability insurance. The LTA are reimbursing that across Great Britain. Like Luke says, that's about £40,000 coming back to Welsh venues. And again, we're really mindful at the moment. We've had a few conversations and a few questions in on the Q&A today from part-time coaches who don't meet the LTA's criteria for receiving funding. Our first point of call is to make sure any coach who is eligible for LTA grant funding of about £1,000, as Luke said, can access that. But then we're definitely doing some lobbying and some work behind the scenes to try and support, a huge amount of part-time coaches who do a brilliant job across Wales, who have missed out. They've fallen through the gap, and we're mindful of that. So it's something that Ellie and Jamie are both working on with the LTA. And as soon as we know more, then we'll contact those coaches and make sure that if there is support available, we can get it to them as quickly as possible. Superb. Thanks, Luke. I'm going to hand over to Pam. I can't see Pam in my screen, but I know she's here somewhere. So once you're up and running, Pam, let me know. We just need to unmute her. And we're going to talk for a couple of minutes around Sport Wales funding packages. And there's a couple of pots here, which Pam's an expert on because she's been working with Sport Wales, and she'll be able to talk through.
Okay, hello everyone, hope you can hear me. Just take you through the two pots of funding packages that have been put together by Sport Wales along with government. The first fund, which is the Emergency Relief Fund, is available and open for applications now. And this is designed for sports clubs who are facing immediate threat to their existence. The fund is up to is available is 400,000, and it's being made available for not-for-profit community sport in Wales. It's targeted at clubs who are already facing significant challenges and who are likely to need immediate financial support during the initial 12 weeks up to the 30th of June, if they are to remain an important part and viable in the areas. Each club will be able to apply for a maximum of £5,000. Since the fund's been released just over 3 weeks ago, Sport Wales received a total of 435 applications for a share of that 400,000 investment pot of funding. During the first 2 weeks, the decision panels have resulted in 104 clubs of all sports being awarded up to £237,000, and there's currently 79 applications which were being reviewed this week. Applications are still being processed and applications are still open, and they envisage there's probably a further 3 rounds of funding decision panels likely to be held. More information on this package can be seen at the Sport Wales website, and there's lots of good sort of frequently asked questions there. It's really important with this, and what we're seeing with a number of applications that are coming in from various clubs is that we're getting requests for stuff about the opening up phase, or purchasing new equipment or new activities. This is not about sort of opening up and new activities taking place. It's very much about sort of here and now and what's the immediate threat to the club in terms of overheads that are going to impact and potentially shut the doors to venues. So that's the first emergency relief, and that is open and active now. And then I'll just give you an overview of the Sports Resilience Fund, which is not yet live, and it's still sort of in discussion phases, taking on board all the information that's coming in from community trusts, other national governing bodies, and what's really affecting and what's going to affect the sector moving forwards. So Sport Wales and Welsh Government again have identified an initial fund of up to 8.1 million, which will allow Sport Wales to support partners beyond the initial emergency relief fund. As you know, it's a quickly changing situation, and Sport Wales are working in community with partners to obtain feedback on how this process is going to work and how best it's going to be used. Some common themes that are coming from partners is coming out of lockdown is going to present further challenges to sport and facilities, especially in a phased manner. And there's going to be challenges over the next 6 months, but maybe longer, in terms of how businesses are going to get back to normal. Tennis Wales is very much feeding into this group through our national governing bodies link around the impact to our venues, so tennis clubs, large indoor centres, through loss of income, through membership and no programmes running, but also the impact on our sort of workforce, our tennis coaches and officials who are generally sort of self-employed, highly skilled workforce and often work full or part-time. And we're very aware that some of the packages that are out there, depending on how people have been set up, are falling through the gaps. So we're trying to keep raising these issues and sort of keeping tennis on the map and very much part of those conversations. Sport Wales are looking for this approach and the support to be a simple application process in order that we can get the money out very quickly to help organisations. When we get more information of how this is going to operate and when it's going to be open, we will circulate that to all partners. But very much we're hoping to get more information sort of mid-May, end of May, and then we'll give you more details on that application process.
Superb, thanks Pam. So yeah, my whistle-stop summary, I guess, emergency relief fund, if you can't open up and you've got bills to pay and the bailiffs are coming around, you've got some real challenges, that's very much the emergency relief fund. £400,000 across every national governing body and every sports club does not go far. So we're having to be, offer Sport Wales advice on, who needs funding and who doesn't. It's a really challenging dynamic at the moment. Make sure if you are applying, it is an emergency. But the Resilience Fund will provide an opportunity, and like Pam alluded to, I think there's a lot of large clubs at risk. The lack of secondary spend, coaching revenue, membership loss, and they've got large sinking funds, and especially some of those CITCs, those public tennis centres, who social distancing stays in place, and they can't have 20, 30, 40, 50 mini tennis players on a court at a time. That presents a real challenge for us maintaining some of our facilities. So that's where Pam's been doing a really good job with Sport Wales directly, trying to make sure that Sport Wales and Welsh Government are aware that tennis may be one of the first sports socially that comes back, but the overheads that come with running our sport, as we all know, sinking funds and employing staff and retaining coaches needs to be looked after and be considered as well. So the last sort of 10, 15 minutes, we just wanted to reflect a little bit on what next and what this new normal looks like. So I think from my perspective, communication remains key. And so do expect over the next couple of weeks and months to have more sessions like this. It may be that we do them in smaller groups where we bring certain types of facilities together to communicate in a more bespoke way where we can have more dialogue face-to-face. It's quite challenging to have 70 people doing a Q&A for it to be valuable to everybody. We are looking to do more of these and have them in smaller groups. So as an example, Ellie's been receiving lots of great feedback from coaches who would like to have a specific coaches forum like this to be able to talk on a regular basis, quite openly about their business, what they're up to, what their plans are for reopening, and how they would like to progress and what support they need. We may do the same for small clubs, for large clubs, for indoor tennis centres as well. So again, please keep sharing this information because communication is going to be key. As we heard from Matt, this isn't going to be it's all over, everything goes straight back to normal. It's going to take some time for us to work together and to adjust. What my commitment, I guess, is from a communication piece upwards. I've got a call with the LTA and Tennis Scotland at 5 o'clock this afternoon, where again, we're going to spend a couple hours on the phone going through what the future could look like and what devolution looks like and what our respective governments are saying. And again, we're pushing for tennis to be one of the first sports back as long as we can all prove that it's safe to do so and that we're not risking public health. So we're very much looking to be in that bracket. We think some other sports have got some real challenges in opening back up. And for us, there are elements of tennis that can crack on quite quickly. But that's going to rely on us having really good communication with 200 coaches and yourselves as venues on a regular basis to make sure we're all working in the same way and that we're not seen to be in breach of any public health advice that's out there. The next thing we're working on, which has come through loud and clear in the questions that you've all submitted, is, well, we talk about this new normal, but what does it look like? And we're working with Sport Wales, with the Welsh Sports Association, in conversation with other governing bodies around a return to play strategy, which is effectively the modifications that we'll be recommending that need to be signed off by Tennis Wales, Tennis Scotland, the LTA, and then into respective governments that will then come down to venues to be able to be implemented. And again, some of the suggestions we've had in from yourselves on the Q&A around, yes, we think singles play with people you live with is a quick win, but we also know that large group coaching may be at the back of the list. We know that indoor opportunities versus outdoor opportunities look very different at the moment. So within the strategy, what we're effectively looking at is guidance for venues and coaches and officials in different phases. And as the lockdown lifts, we'll be able to bring tennis back more and more as we're used to seeing it. But that may take some time, as Matt's alluded to. That could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. We're very much led by the government advice. But what we're looking to put forward is an LTA, Tennis Wales, Tennis Scotland approach in terms of when the restrictions are lifted, whether Boris does that on Sunday or Mark does that next Tuesday, that all of our clubs that we're responsible as a governing body for will have some really clear guidance, recommendations that provide supplies and equipment to you guys as well to make sure that we can deliver tennis really safely and really effectively. So that piece of work is very much a work in progress, and I've got document after document of different scenarios. It's not right to share that yet. It's not finished. It's not gone in front of Welsh Government yet. But again, that's the piece of work we're talking to at the moment with the Welsh Sports Association, with Sport Wales, with all the other national governing bodies, for us all to propose what does phase one look like to all of us. But I hope that you guys will have something very soon to be able to look at and reflect on and be able to start implementing ideas and plans ready for when we are able to move ahead and hit the ground running, rather than have a 2 or 3 week lag in between. And the last piece here, I suspect, is just around funding and resource. Now, we are looking to open tennis back up. That's absolutely our commitment, to work with you all to get things back up and running in one way or another. We're still not clear on what that looks like, but we'll be making our recommendations. And again, we are looking to go into Tennis Wales reserves this year to be able to provide some sort of basic support to enable that to happen. And to give you an example, our turnover has gone from £1.2 million back down to sort of £700,000. And we've been in this situation for about 4 or 5 weeks. So Tennis Wales board have agreed to use Tennis Wales reserves. We're going to use about 30% of our reserves this year to be able to support venues with a package to open tennis back up. And again, once we're clear on exactly what the guidelines are from Welsh Government, we'll be sharing that with you all, because we know there are some concerns around, do we need PPE and signage at all tennis venues? Probably yes, we do. We need to make allowances for those sorts of things. And if we want tennis to be opened up everywhere fairly and consistently, we need to support all clubs and all coaches with basic equipment and stocks and supplies and signage to make sure our sport is absolutely safe for you as volunteers, for people working, as well as for the people playing. So that's very much the piece of work that we're looking at now. As I sort of alluded to, I have a call with the LTA in the next sort of 15, 20 minutes with Tennis Scotland, where we're starting to build on these ideas and these plans. But it's really important that obviously we're going to be led by the public health advice. So it's not our decision ultimately. We need to be led by what Welsh Government give us as a framework that we'll then be able to adapt to accordingly and come to you with far more information. And as I sort of alluded to, the new normal, it is phased. We're under no expectation that we're going to get a date of a certain Friday or a Monday and all of a sudden things go back to normal. It will be a phased plan. It will be led by public health. We are talking to other governing bodies and working really well with the LTA to try and look at what variations and modifications we can make tennis. Ultimately, it's all of our responsibility to show that we can make tennis safe to practice. And it can be a real positive in that we've got tennis courts across the country. We've got a really wide demographic of people playing. It's brilliant for men, for women, for young children, for senior citizens. Everyone in the population can take part. And that's a really valuable piece of both physical health and mental health as well. So that's very much our narrative. And again, we'll be working with colleagues to put that in front of Welsh Government. And again, once we are in that position to do so, we'll be publishing, sharing that guidance of what tennis could look like for social play, coaching, facility management considerations as best as we can. So that's very much where we've got to from the set agenda. There were quite a few questions submitted. So our original idea was we would have 20 or 30 people on this call and we would do a bit of a live Q&A, but there are more than 70 who've dialed in, which we're really grateful for. Our commitment is that we are going to share the Q&As in total, as I alluded to. So you'll have a list of all the questions that everybody's asked and we've answered and gone back on. Some of them I hope we've answered throughout the presentation. that you've got a bit of an update now in terms of where our thinking is, and it's been really helpful. Again, I'm hoping that coaches know they can contact Ellie at any time. Venues know that obviously Luke and Pam are very much there to support in terms of anything you need. We'll be sharing everyone's contact details. So if there are any urgent requests or things you'd like to discuss, please do touch base with the team. That's absolutely why we're here, to be able to help and navigate this difficult period. Some of the broad questions that were coming out, lots of questions from indoor centres who are concerned. We absolutely recognise that for indoor centres, there needs to be a volume of people coming into those tennis facilities for them to be financially sustainable. That poses a real risk to those centres. They can't run at a loss because they won't exist. They'll be closed down. So we know there are some challenges there around indoor facilities. We need to be working with Sport Wales, with each of our indoor facilities, all the management teams and the trustees and the boards that we have there. Pam's been sort of navigating that relationship with us, with CITCs. We know large clubs have got similar issues, large clubs with sinking funds that could be 15, 20, 30,000 pounds a year to maintain their courts, need to have a volume of activity, of leagues, tournaments, competitions, which is a real challenge at the moment. So again, we're putting some of those scenarios into our planning. And we know coaches and officials are in a situation where their livelihood at what should be the busiest time of the year is unable to take place. And again, we're looking at how we can make sure tennis can come back in a safe way and can still allow some of the variations and the modifications we're going to suggest to allow coaches to work. But again, it's going to be a real challenge in the first instance for it to come back straight away. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, which we don't quite have scenarios for until we get some real clarity from Welsh Government. I think the big observation from me is that the tennis community has adapted really, really well in extremely difficult circumstances. We've seen the communications going out from clubs to members to keep them entertained, to keep them reassured, communication lines staying open. We've seen coaches using this opportunity to start planning ahead for September and Christmas as the best they can. And again, our commitment, anything you need from us, please do come and speak to us, contact the team, email, phone, and we're doing our best behind the scenes to work with the LTA, work with the Welsh Government, Welsh Sports Association, to lobby in a really positive way to access funding, grants, loans, and the information needed for tennis to come back. But it is, as sort of Matt alluded to earlier on, it changes on a very regular basis, and the conversations we have one day look very different the next, and it's a really unprecedented period. It's very difficult to plan for, but I think we are in a fortunate position in that I do look at our business of tennis and think actually we've got some real strengths here, that we've got some really great volunteers and people working in our sport right the way across the country who can help make sure that tennis comes back as safely as possible. And we've got a real opportunity to enable tennis to open up afterwards if we make sure that we can speak to all of the large clubs, the CITCs, the small clubs that are struggling, to make sure that any questions or any funding that you can access in the short term, we can make available. So I was going to wrap up there. We are going to share the presentation in full. So you're more than welcome to share that with other committee members, with anybody else that you want to share that with from a local authority perspective, or any of your coaching team or officials. Our next steps will be to send this back to you. So you'll have the full presentation with all the questions and answers. And again, as more information becomes available from the LTA, from Welsh Government, and we do expect to see a bit more of a timeline now, rather than the 3-week extension just being verbatim, we'll share that information with you, because ultimately, 86 registered venues, 200 coaches, 1,200 tennis courts, we're going to need to have a really close working relationship and dialogue individually with every venue, coach and official, for us to open tennis up safely when the time is right. The last thing I'm going to finish on just before we disappear, the very strong message from the Welsh Government today to avoid any or poor messaging is that nothing has changed as we currently stand. We are still in a period of lockdown. There are no lifting of social distancing at the moment. Tennis courts should absolutely be remaining closed until we're advised otherwise. And I really appreciate everyone's support and the way you've all been managing this situation. But do come and speak to us. It's been great to see a lot of people on the call today. We'll be looking to do more of this, both with venues and coaches and officials, as the situation sort of moves forward as well. So thank you very much. Big thank you to my team as well for joining in and helping prepare all the information and sending out this communication. Big thanks to Matt at the WSA. And I hope everyone stays safe. Have a nice bank holiday weekend in the best way you all can. And I look forward to seeing you all face-to-face at a tennis venue, hopefully soon, and we can all jump back on court. So thanks for your time, and really appreciate it.